Our last two categories of tissue are going to fit in one video, and that is going to be muscular and nervous tissue, and they get grouped together because they are both classified as excitable tissues. Excitability is a characteristic of all living cells, but it's developed much higher in nervous and muscular tissue. So what we're talking about, why they get excited, how they get excited, is a membrane potential, the charge difference that occurs across the cell membrane. So muscular and nervous tissue are able to respond quickly to a stimuli. That means a signal by means of changes in membrane potential. What they do with that information is a little bit different. Nerves are able to transmit that signal to other cells, whereas muscles change by shortening their cell, contracting their cell. This is just a review of all characteristics of living cells. I think to notice that a reaction to stimuli is here, that all cells have a sense of responsiveness, that when they get that stimuli, they are able to respond to it. But again, specifically, muscle cells and nervous cells are able to do that to a higher degree. So here's nervous tissue. It's very easy to pick out. The nerve cell itself, the neuron, is very big, and it has all of these kind of arms coming off of there. The nerve cell, or the nervous tissue, is specialized for communication. So it is specifically designed to communicate with other cells by sending on these signals. So the neuron is the nerve cell. That's the big purple kind of octopus looking cell that you see. It's able to detect the stimuli and then respond quickly by sending on that signal to other cells. So the parts of the neuron that you will see, that long arm coming in from the left-hand side of the image, is the axon that is sending out the information. And then this says neurosoma, but sometimes you may see it called the cell body. And then the dendrites. Those dendrites are what's receiving the information. And we'll get more into this into the nervous system, but that big purple is the nerve cell. And then you'll also see glial cells, and also called neuroglia. They basically help the neurons. They're kind of the housekeepers, and they're small. To me, they just look like a big nucleus, but they're kind of dotted around in the nervous tissue. So here goes through the parts of the neuron. Again, I'm not sure in the lab if you're going to have to label these parts or not, but here they are. The cell body has the nucleus. It's kind of the center of the genetic control, of course, and protein synthesis, which we just learned about. And then the dendrites come into the cell body. They receive the signals from other cells. And so you can see how there are plenty of them, and so they can each be connected to a different cell and receiving multiple signals. And then that axon is the longest appendage, and it sends the outgoing signals. You can't see the end of the axon in this picture, but you may be able to in the lab. Okay, muscular tissue is our last category. It has elongated cells that are specialized to contract. And when they contract, they exert that force on other tissues and organs. This creates movement. Of course, body and limb movement, but we don't think about this. It creates movement in the digestive system, in the stomach, in the intestines. It helps with waste elimination, breathing, speech, and even blood circulation. It is an important source of body heat, and there are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. First is skeletal. This is gonna feel weird, but these long kind of rows, if you will, are the cells, okay? And that is called a cell. The cell itself is called a muscle fiber. I find that to be very confusing, so I think it's funny that Dr. Lin put "don't be confused." It is extremely confusing. Let's just call it a muscle cell, but it is called a muscle fiber. Most are attached to bones. There are some exceptions listed here, but they have multiple nuclei. I think this is what makes it so confusing, is that one of those long cylinders looks like it is more than one cell because it has multiple nuclei, and so that's confusing. And those nuclei are usually right up against the cell membrane. They have striations, or if you want to think about them as stripes, but they are alternating dark and light bands. And when you get to muscles, you will look way more into detail about those striations and what they do and how they have an importance in the contraction of muscles. And skeletal muscle is voluntary. That means there's conscious control over those skeletal muscles. We are choosing which muscles to contract voluntarily. Cardiac muscle is found only in the heart, and I can tell cardiac muscle separate from skeletal muscle because of this branched image that you see now. Because see this extra white space, and see how some of those fibers, instead of just going in a long straight line, they seem to branch. That's how I can tell cardiac muscle apart. And so cardiac muscle, instead of calling it muscle fibers, are called cardiocytes. They are shorter and then branched, and they usually contain one centrally located nucleus. So the nucleus is not up against the cell membrane like it was in skeletal muscle. And then they have these discs. This is another way I can tell cardiac muscle apart, is because those darker lines kind of going perpendicular to the cells. Those are discs, and they join the cardiocytes end to end. And they are important. It's a very tight junction, and they allow that signal to travel rapidly from cell to cell, which we need in our cardiac muscle so that our heart can contract kind of as a single unit. Cardiac muscle is also striated, but it is involuntary. You don't have to decide for those muscles to contract. They contract in an involuntary way. Okay, last but not least is smooth muscle. We see this in our digestive system, in the stomach, in the intestines. It is not striated. Now, I think smooth muscle sometimes looks like stratified squamous epithelium, but you'll want to compare those and make sure that you don't get them mixed up. It usually has a very large nucleus that looks like it's kind of taking up the whole cell, but no striations here. Is also involuntary. The cells are short, and so the nucleus sometimes looks like it's taking up the whole cell. So this forms layers of muscle in the digestive system, respiratory, urinary tract. It's around blood vessels, and it propels material through an organ. So in the stomach specifically, there's 3 layers of smooth muscle, and it helps the stomach to contract in multiple directions to propel the food downward.